So for my research assignment, I looked at the project in Food Structure by Work AC. And this is a project in Brooklyn, specifically in the neighborhoods of Bushwick and Bedford. And they claim that these neighborhoods are underserved by supermarkets and suffering from a number of health problems associated with poor diet. And they propose a new food infrastructure for these neighborhoods that can eventually spread to the entire city. So the first project was looking at the lens of discourses. And so I looked at different topics that were that Work AC over to research and analyze a little bit further before coming up with a proposal. So the first one would be food sources, and this is a map of the existing neighborhoods and the condition, and the food sources, which is just mostly supermarkets. And so you could see outside of those circles, there's a lot of void, and those are known as food deserts, which healthy food is hard to obtain. They also had to look at food types, the effects of different foods on your body, which translates into health. And this is how they chose those specific regions, because there was a high percentage of diabetes, blood pressure, and asthma in those neighborhoods relative or compared to other parts of the city. And so they also looked at different examples of infrastructure that would affect food, so farming, markets, and how transportation takes an effect as a whole system. And that translates to the design, which is made up of 4 parts: farm streets, transit hubs, organic bodegas, and aquaponic networks. And so to my research question, how can architecture and design influence the culture and lifestyle of the community? For here, I just looked at a general sense of different things that make up a culture, and examples of these through architecture. And ultimately, these are different types of spaces that could affect the community in a positive way. Now, looking at poster 2 through the lens of methods, I first looked at the element of how food affects your health. So the first method, source of information, they took the food pyramid and how that directly translates into your health. So for example, fish and poultry digest into amino acids and turn into muscle, versus carbs, which turn into fat. So looking at that, as well as using the method of comparative analysis, I found this bar graph which shows percentage of life lived in poor health in the US is relatively high compared to other. And then over here you have the standard American diet, which is 63% processed foods, oils, fats, and refined foods and sweets. So looking at this data, possible solutions would be the idea of organic foods, which can be done through farming. And so this leads to another method of mapping, which is through farming. There's not very many in that area. And here's a diagram that shows before and after of the proposal of the existing farming conditions. So adding those farm streets would definitely improve distribution. Looking at my research question, and I looked at community space and its context. So source of information, I looked at culture, elements of culture, and again how that translates to architecture. And then I also used comparative analysis, and the example I used was parks, which is something that could affect the community. And I looked at 4 different parks around the world: Central Park in New York, Griffith Park in LA, Luxembourg in Paris, and Hyde Park in London. And these are well-known parks that are positioned well within their active cities and serve as important spaces where people inside and outside of the community often occupy. So developing spaces that consistently brings groups of people together, encourages social interaction, and that may serve as a platform, a focal point of a community to design around. Now the third poster would be through purpose, and the 3 different elements that I looked through their project was program, food consumption, and farming. For program, I just looked at I broke it down and I looked at existing program that they offer, which is supermarkets and farms. And basically, I broke down their diagram or their map into different maps. So farm streets and networks that expands infrastructure and the range. Bodegas also increases food distribution in social spaces, and circulation makes it easy to get around, which is makes the whole system. And then looking at food consumption, same stuff that we talked about, how the food diets affects your health, and uh, how that translates into farming. And then I looked at farming itself and how existing farms are kind of central and it's kind of limiting. It acts as like confined space, like a market, versus farm streets, how they're linear and it encourages movement and it's just makes it easier to spread throughout the region. Now, for my research question, I looked at community through programs, social interaction, and culture. And these diagrams, the first one for program basically just shows the more program that are implemented in a community, the better, because you should design towards need versus want. And so that'll attract users and ultimately benefit more people. And then social interaction, something as simple as a fountain in a park, a little design like that could just affect the social interaction of a space and kind of activate it. That makes it more public and exposed and more easier for social gatherings. And so design influences how, why, and when people come together and socially interact, which is an important aspect of a strong community. And then looking at culture in a community, again, how some elements like artwork, literature, and food translate to architecture like museums and theaters, which leads to social interaction, new experience, knowledge, and diversity. So design implementing cultural elements can engage people and create a stronger community as well as expose them to new things that can be beneficial. And so looking at this project through these three lenses really kind of gives a better understanding of how research translates into proposals and designs.